So let's get started and going to the open-ended question we had on Monday. Our open-ended question on Monday was, what is the toughest decision you've had to make and where did you go for advice? Now, Jason, actually, I appreciate my boy coming back and being the first answer, but we're not going to talk about his answer first. We're going to talk about the area that was the biggest group of answers, and that was the end of life or killing a new product idea related. For me, this was the toughest decision I had to make. It was an end of life decision for a business I was hired to run. Anytime you're hired to run something and you get in and underneath the covers and decide it's time to kill it, it's not a great place to be. Steve had the same type of situation. I want to go to Greg. I believe the bottom one here, the inherited, is the first of your two. Talk to me about, you inherited a product. I believe you invested in engagement analytics. Talk to me about the process you went through that led you to the tough decision.
So this is a case where I was joined a company, and one of the product was multiple products that I owned. One of the products was greatly invested by multiple people across the organization. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. We have lots and lots of people engaging. And then when you ask the question, okay, can you show me the metrics? And there was nothing. There was anecdotal information. It says, okay, let's, as part of, standard practice, let's go get, put in place, standard tracking of what is our users looking at within the product, what's the engagement, all those things, because then you can adjust, what are we actually going to invest in the future? Once we kind of spent that time to put in all of the analytics, we found that there was actually very, very few audience to do that. The vast majority of the audience were actually internal people, which was not the target market at all.
And didn't pay for it probably.
And didn't pay for it. So, now you're getting into the tough conversation. Okay, should we actually invest in this? Is this actually the wrong product? Is the content wrong? All those things. And that's where I kind of partnered up with my marketing partner to say, okay, what do we actually do here? Are we just like not hitting the target? And it's just kind of work together and say, this is just not a product. It's not a product for that is an external product. And that was really the hard part of going and, explaining with data and getting kind of over that emotional, roller coaster that comes with, a lot of people are invested in this thing, that this is something we should stop investing in. We should just stop investing and then determine how we're going to move whoever our external people into the proper place that we want them, into the proper products. And then the hardest part was actually the internal people, because there was this internal love that was just unfounded. And that was the hard part. See, there's a big dance, but it's also, you have to think about as the product leader is like, what are you doing with your people? Do you actually like put money and put investment into your developers to build something that's actually not used? And that really started having those bigger conversations. You start getting more and more groundswell of like, this isn't worthwhile. We should not.
And actually, I've got that second paragraph of your other answer related to that type of stuff on the next page, which I put as political. Question for you. This is a tip. I had a product I inherited that had a major feature that nobody used, but was huge buying criteria. How do you look at, was this a standalone product, or was it something that was part of a suite? Or
this was a standalone product by itself.
Yep.
And there were some features that you can actually move on to another product suite, but it was a standalone product that they just kept on investing in, and it's investing in for a longer period of time. But it was one of those, like, people love it, and we're like, well, who loves it? Yeah. And it was, it was not necessarily a revenue driver at all. There wasn't a lot of revenue driven around it. So it's like, what are we trying to do? Is this a branding thing? Is this what are we doing with this thing? And you start asking a lot of those hard questions.
Yep.
And it really becomes it really became a delicate dance, because you kind of came in as the new guy and you're investing in this. And now you're saying, well, the baby's ugly, you know, and that's hard. You have to kind of be very, very, you know, delicate with the conversations with a lot of the executives.
No, I completely agree. It was interesting because there's always an executive part to it. The second from the bottom, the found an idea. This was from, I believe Rob Goldberg. He found the idea. They modeled it by hand and validated the need, but they had a problem with what the price would have to be to do it manually. The price point didn't work. They weren't willing to pay. And then they modeled it with AI, and it took a while for them to figure out that, you know, right now they'd had to shelve it, and they had to do some work to convince the business leader to shelve it. And often that's part of the hardest problem, is convincing the business leaders, whether it's emotional or, you know, stars in the sky. When we get to the next page, I want to bring Paul in to talk about his situation with the cash cow. I want to look, you know, they made a strategy decision when Rob was there to not go forward with the product. That, you know, in a way that's end of life, because it's right where it was beginning. You know, I'd like to reach out to some of the other panelists, you know, Brian or John or Tom. Have you guys had situations with tough end of life decisions that you had to make?
Yeah, I'm going through one right now where we have a product that's being used internally just to prove the technology out. It's pretty much breaking even, a little bit of extra cost savings over the cost. We see a lot more value if we move it out to our external users, to our advisors, but making that decision of, are we willing to put this as a higher priority than other stuff during the coming year to be able to get it out to our advisors and make it valuable? Or do we say it's break even, let's just cut it and pick it up at some other point?
Well, it's tough. I mean, now Clayton Christensen, Innovative Solution, there's tons of statistics out there. In Innovative Solution, he talks about research that showed that something like 60% of all products that started in a new NPD process didn't make it to market. And 40% of those that did, actually, no, reverse that. 40% of products that started never made it to market, and whatever the status was, something like 76% never had an ROI, either didn't make it to market or have an ROI. And sometimes the toughest thing is killing it early because people want to take it further. How do you start thinking about an ROI?
Well, right now, you know, we have good data about our usage right now and our cost savings with our service professionals that are using it. But, you know, as what it can do, so it's a chatbot product, and it's if we get this out externally, what's the contact abatement we can get with that they don't need to talk to one of our agents. So part of that is just educated guess. Here's how many questions we think we can handle with X amount of adoption across our advisors. It would give us this percentage of contact abatement, which would be a certain savings. But, you know, until you get there and you actually get it out into the market to prove out those numbers.
Yeah, it's tough. Or you do a moderate rollout. John, Tom, or Monica, have you guys had end of life big decisions?
This is Tom. As far as there are two things here that kind of struck a chord. One is regarding end of life and that decision. I've had products that it wasn't difficult to know that they just needed to die. It was, as soon as you looked at them, you knew it. The harder part, and it goes to what was said before, was navigating the politics and the emotions. People were so invested in it. There's either an emotional component that they don't want to let it go. It's their baby. Or there's politics involved, and you got to navigate that and come up with the right evidence that this thing just needs to go away. The other part of that that I was going to mention that had struck a chord was the emotional component for that. That was the difficult part for me, having been invested in a product for years and then moving up the ladder and having to learn to step back and look at it critically and objectively to know, what do I want to do with this? What needs to go into it? How do we want to take this in the market? And how do I have to convince people they need to step back as well? so we can evaluate it appropriately. The emotional
Objectively.
component turned out to be the emotional component turned out to be the harder part in that process. But some of the products, as soon as you looked at them, you thought, no, they need to go.
No, I had multiple times, and I was the tough decision, the first one listed there, and multiple times I've come in, I've done my due diligence. I'm like, it's time to put a bullet in it, right? And when that's the job you were hired to do, that's one of the harder decisions you're going to make, because you're not sure, you don't have enough time there for them to have the trust of, to feel that they'll take care of me. I remember a dinner in London with the president of my business unit, and we were there for a European sales kickoff, and I was putting his presentation together. And as I started putting all the data together, I'm like, our business unit really doesn't really make sense. I think we need to fold it into the proper. And my whole flight over was, how am I going to tell this president of a division, a $50 million division, dude, I don't think they need us.
Well, have you run into the cases like these? The emotional part is the people that have been more or less dedicated to it. So if you're talking about killing a product, for instance, there may be dedicated developers and operations and all those. And you're like, well, what are you going to do with these people? It's like, if you could kill the product, they have nothing to work on. And that's, now that kind of comes to the maturity of the business of like repurposing people and putting them onto new things. Or is it just, okay, great, we're just going to cut everybody?
Well, and that comes into, there's the decision part of it, and then there's the plan of how to do it. And getting the senior leadership to buy off on it, you need to have a plan that's going to think about those things as well.